So 1 in 4 of us was actually beaten as a child to the point of a mark being left.
Which is just a staggering statistic.
It really is. And, 1 in 3 couples engages in physical violence. 1/4 of us grew up with alcoholic relatives.
Yeah.
So when you hear the word trauma, it's incredibly common to immediately picture like a combat zone, right? Or survivors of these massive headline-making natural disasters.
Oh, absolutely. That's the default assumption.
But the research we're diving into today paints a completely different picture for you. Trauma is this invisible epidemic, and it's happening right inside our own neighborhoods and homes.
Yeah, it isn't just a battlefield issue reserved for the evening news.
Right. It's a physiological disruption that fundamentally interrupts the plot of our lives and the lives of the people we pass in the grocery store every single day.
It literally shatters the narrative trajectory a person is on. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore the mechanics behind that disruption. We're synthesizing decades of research across neuroscience and psychology, leaning heavily on the insights from Dr. Bessel Kolk's work to understand how overwhelming experiences physically alter the brain and the body.
And most importantly, we are unpacking the biological science of how we can actually restore that structure.
Exactly.
So, okay, let's unpack this. We're going to examine the brain's internal alarm system, uncover the physiological reason why traumatized individuals literally lose touch with their physical bodies, and
we'll explore the surprising nonverbal therapies that repair the nervous system.
Right. Because to figure out how to heal, we really have to start at the neurological baseline. Like, why can't a traumatized person just move on?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And I often think of the brain's threat detection system like a home security alarm. It's incredibly useful when there's an actual burglar prying open your window.
Right. It saves your life.
But if that alarm gets stuck in the on position and it's shrieking at like 120 decibels just because you burned a piece of toast,
daily life becomes impossible.
Exactly. So what is mechanically misfiring in the brain to cause that?
Well, we need to look at the structural relationship between 2 critical areas of the brain. Deep in the limbic system, we have the amygdala.
Okay.
This functions as your brain's smoke detector. Its sole evolutionary purpose is to scan the incoming sensory environment, subtle shifts in tone of voice, a sudden movement, a loud noise.
Just constantly scanning.
Right. And it instantly decides if you are safe or in danger, and it operates completely beneath conscious rational thought.
So you don't even realize it's happening.
Not at all. But above that, we have the medial prefrontal cortex, or the MPFC.
Okay, the MPFC.
Think of the MPFC as the watchtower. It provides that top-down objective context.
Okay.
So if the smoke detector goes off because of that burned toast you mentioned, the watchtower surveys the scene, recognizes the lack of real threat, and sends an inhibitory signal down to the amygdala to shut off the alarm.
So the watchtower basically contextualizes the panic so the body can stand down.
Exactly. It inhibits the fear response. But what's fascinating here is that in a traumatized brain, this delicate neurochemical balance is just destroyed.
How so?
Well, massive repeated flooding of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline physically alters these brain structures. The amygdala actually hypertrophies.
But it grows.
Yeah, it grows more reactive and dense. Meanwhile, the synaptic connections in the MPFC weaken.
Wow.
So the watchtower effectively loses its power supply. It can no longer send those inhibitory signals downward. The brain's floodgates are just stuck open.
Leaving the person entirely at the mercy of the smoke detector.
Yes. They are thrown into full sensory overload, reacting to mundane everyday stressors with a catastrophic release of survival hormones.
Which really explains why overcoming trauma is never a matter of sheer willpower, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
You cannot simply logic your way out of a panic attack if the biological hardware responsible for logic has been forcibly taken offline.
Right, you just don't have the tools available in that moment.
And there's a story in the source text about a man named Tom, a Vietnam veteran and a highly successful lawyer, that just perfectly illustrates this.
Yeah, Tom's story is so compelling.
Because on paper, Tom had the American dream. A thriving law practice, a high school sweetheart, kids. But his internal baseline was entirely broken.
Yeah, Tom survived a horrific ambush in a rice paddy where his entire platoon, including his closest friend, was killed or wounded.
Just awful.
And a decade later, he couldn't function during the 4th of July. The humidity, the foliage in his backyard, the sound of the fireworks.
It's too much like Vietnam.
Exactly. These environmental cues bypassed his rational brain entirely and sent his hyperactive amygdala into absolute overdrive.
Right.
He reported feeling completely dead and numb inside during normal, everyday family life. The only time he could feel fully alive was during high adrenaline moments.
Like defending mobsters in intense murder trials or riding his motorcycle at dangerously high speeds.
Yeah.
So his neurological baseline for feeling alive had been permanently recalibrated to combat. The mundane dopamine of like a family dinner couldn't even register on his blown-out receptors.
No, it wasn't enough.
He needed the adrenaline of a life-or-death scenario just to feel a pulse. And his reasoning for refusing medication to stop his horrific night terrors is just devastating.
It really is.
He said, if the nightmares go away, I will have abandoned my friends. I need to be a living memorial.
Yeah.
It's this tragic loyalty to the dead that keeps him frozen. And getting stuck in that trauma loop does something completely catastrophic to the human imagination.
Yes, it does.
The Rorschach ink blot tests conducted on these veterans demonstrate this perfectly, don't they?
They do. The Rorschach test reveals how the mind constructs meaning from ambiguous visual data.
Right.
If you show someone a random splash of ink, a healthy mind uses its imaginative flexibility to see dancing monks or a butterfly.
Just something creative.
Exactly. But when researchers gave the second card, which features a splash of red ink, to a medic named Bill, his reaction was visceral.
He didn't see a butterfly.
No. His heart rate spiked, he began sweating, and he entered a full-blown flashback of the charred flesh of a child he had tried to save in Vietnam.
Wow.
And out of 21 veterans tested, 16 superimposed their specific trauma onto a completely meaningless blot of ink.
And the remaining 5 veterans saw absolutely nothing, right? They just stared at the card and said, it's just a bunch of ink.
Right. They lacked the capacity to project any internal imagery onto the external world.
So whether the brain is superimposing a horrific memory onto the present or completely shutting down all interpretive thought to avoid the memory, the end game is the same. Trauma obliterates imagination.
It really does.
If your neural pathways are locked into replaying the worst moment of your life or busy suppressing everything so you don't feel it, you lose the mental flexibility to envision a hopeful future. And with that imagination, there is no new possibility.
Well, the human organism is relentlessly pragmatic, you know.
How do you mean?
If the internal noise, the racing heart, the gut-wrenching dread, the flooding of cortisol, if all of that becomes too metabolically expensive and terrifying to sustain, the organism has to adapt.
Right.
The only viable survival strategy left is to pull the plug on internal awareness entirely.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this framing so we are crystal clear for you listening.
Sir, go ahead.
When we talk about pulling the plug or dissociating, isn't that essentially a psychological defense mechanism?
Yeah.
Like, zoning out during a painfully boring movie.
Yeah.
It sounds almost metaphorical, but you're suggesting a literal physical death of these neural pathways.
It is a literal metabolic shutdown, not a metaphor.
Wow. Really?
Yeah. Dr. Ruth Lanius conducted a fascinating brain scan study looking at the brain's default mode network.
Okay.
This is the network that lights up when you are just staring out a window, daydreaming, or feeling your own internal state.
Just kind of being.
Right. She placed individuals with histories of severe chronic childhood abuse into a scanner and asked them to do something seemingly simple. Just lie still, focus on your breathing, and think about nothing in particular.
And what did the imaging show?
The brain areas responsible for self-awareness and visceral feelings were completely dark.
Completely dark.
The brain was literally starving those regions of oxygen and glucose. In their desperate effort to shut off terrifying sensations, the organism adapted by deadening the neurological capacity to feel anything at all.
So they survived by basically abandoning their own physical bodies.
Exactly.
And the term for this resulting condition is alexithymia, right? Greek for not having words for feelings.
Yes, alexithymia.
When you lose that internal awareness, which is called interoception, your agency dissolves. You might have clenched fists and a flushed face looking absolutely furious, but if asked, you will honestly deny that you are angry.
Because the signal from the body simply isn't reaching the conscious mind.
Right. Like even right now as you're listening to this, notice your own body. Are your shoulders tense? Is your breathing shallow? A healthy nervous system allows you to notice that tension and consciously drop your shoulders.
But a traumatized system doesn't even register that the shoulders are hiked up to the ears.
Right, and losing that internal compass is incredibly dangerous. You can no longer tell what environments are threatening, but equally, you can't tell what is safe or nourishing.
And while the conscious mind might be numb, the lower parts of the brain are still registering the threat. They continue signaling the adrenal glands to pump out stress hormones. the body is essentially treating the suppressed emotion as an invading pathogen.
Which perfectly explains the cascade of chronic physical illnesses. If you ignore the emotional warning signs, that constant flood of cortisol causes systemic inflammation.
It does.
The immune system starts attacking the body's own tissues, manifesting as migraines, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, or autoimmune disorders. The conscious mind checks out, but the visceral organs keep the score.
They absolutely keep the score.
So here's where it gets really interesting. If the trauma is locked in these nonverbal, physical, deeper parts of the brain, then traditional talk therapy has a glaring limitation.
Yes, a very big one.
Sitting on a couch, intellectualizing your past, doesn't change the physiology of an inflamed nervous system. You can understand exactly why you were traumatized, but the watchtower is still offline. So how do we bypass the rational brain and speak the language of the nervous system to wake the body back up safely?
Well, the brain offers two pathways for regulation, top-down and bottom-up.
Okay.
Top-down regulation involves strengthening that medial prefrontal cortex, the watchtower, through mindfulness meditation. It is the practice of observing your internal states without being hijacked by them, learning to ask, notice that sensation, what happens next?
But top-down processing completely fails when the body is logged in sheer panic or total collapse, doesn't it?
It does, and that is where bottom-up regulation becomes critical.
Bottom up.
Yes. This involves recalibrating the nervous system directly through breath, movement, and touch. We are aiming to change the physiological baseline of the organism by working with the vagus nerve.
Right, which functions as the body's superhighway, connecting the brainstem to the heart, lungs, and gut.
Exactly.
We have to talk about the trauma-sensitive yoga study here.
Right.
Because when someone hears yoga for trauma, the initial reaction is usually pretty skeptical. It sounds far too simple.
It sounds like a wellness trend.
Right. But the researchers actually measured heart rate variability, or HRV, to prove the physiological impact.
Yes, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, HRV measures the microscopic variations in time between your heartbeats.
Okay.
It is the ultimate indicator of synchrony between the sympathetic nervous system, the body's accelerator, and the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's brake.
Accelerator and brake. Got it.
When you breathe in, the accelerator engages and your heart rate speeds up slightly. When you breathe out, the vagus nerve applies the brake and your heart slows down. A healthy, resilient system has a high HRV, meaning it flexibly dances between the gas and the brake.
But the researchers discovered that traumatized individuals had unusually low heart rate variability.
Very low.
The metaphor that clicks for me here is likening the vagus nerve to a cellular brake cable. Chronic trauma physically frays that cable. So the organism is flooding the engine with gas, and no matter how hard the brain tries to press the brake pedal, the signal never reaches the heart.
The physical connection is degraded. And to rebuild it, the researchers utilized therapeutic yoga.
But not like doing headstands or whatever.
No, this had absolutely nothing to do with perfecting physical postures or getting a workout. It was a rigorous practice in cultivating interoception.
That internal awareness again.
Right. The instructor would guide participants into a mild stretch and simply ask them to notice the specific muscles engaging.
But how does noticing a muscle stretch physically repair a frayed vagus nerve?
Well, by forcing the brain to consciously track real-time physical sensations, you are actively firing new neural pathways between the visceral organs and the brain.
Wow.
You are myelinating the vagal pathways, essentially insulating the wires so the signals move faster and stronger. Furthermore, by observing mild discomfort in a stretch and realizing that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, the amygdala learns that physical sensation does not automatically equal death.
It's like reintroducing yourself to your own house, room by room, after a terrifying break-in.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
For years, you've avoided the basement and the attic because the sheer thought of them triggers a panic response. But through bottom-up practices like yoga or breath work, you're slowly walking into those rooms, turning on the lights, and proving to your nervous system that the space belongs to you again.
Yes.
And the brain scans taken after 20 weeks of this yoga practice actually showed increased metabolic activation in the self-awareness centers of the brain. The network was literally coming back online.
Reclaiming the physical body is a profound milestone, but it introduces the next massive hurdle.
Which is?
Once you can inhabit your own skin without dissociating, how do you safely let other people in? The human brain is inherently social, wired for connection.
But for a traumatized individual, another human being is often the ultimate unpredictable trigger.
Exactly. And we navigate this through the lens of Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory.
Okay, what's that?
Our autonomic nervous system regulates physiological states in a specific hierarchy. When threatened, the mammalian brain's first instinct is social engagement. We use our facial muscles, vocal tone, and eye contact to call for help. We look to the pack.
Right.
But if no one comes or the threat is too great, we drop down the evolutionary ladder into the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight.
We mobilize for survival.
And if mobilization fails, like if a person is physically trapped or overpowered, the organism drops to the most primitive survival state of all. The dorsal vagal complex takes over, dropping the heart rate and plunging the body into an extreme freeze or collapse.
So to experience the joy of connection, play, or physical intimacy, you have to be securely anchored in that highest state of social engagement.
You literally have to turn off your evolutionary vigilance and expose your vulnerability.
Which is terrifying.
It is. You cannot coax someone out of a freeze state by demanding they talk about their feelings. The watchtower is still offline.
So what do?
You coax them out through visceral rhythmic attunement. The source material highlights Steve Gross, a clinical social worker who ran a play program.
Oh, the beach ball story.
Yes. He would encounter these deeply frozen, traumatized children in the clinic waiting room. He didn't approach them directly or demand eye contact, which would trigger their amygdala.
Right, that would be too much.
He would simply walk around the room, bouncing a brightly colored beach ball. He'd accidentally let it roll near a child, gently nudge it toward their foot, and just wait.
He initiates a physical rhythm without demanding any emotional vulnerability.
Exactly. The child might eventually give the ball a half-hearted pickback. Gross would return it, establishing a slow, predictable, back-and-forth rhythm.
Like a heartbeat almost.
Yeah. This nonverbal reciprocal exchange sends a powerful signal up the vagus nerve to the brainstem. It says, the environment is predictable, you are safe.
Wow.
From that simple rhythmic attunement, he created a microenvironment where the child's social engagement system could slowly boot back up. This is the physiological mechanism behind why choral singing, drumming, or team sports are so incredibly effective at healing trauma.
So what does this all mean? This relational attunement doesn't just apply to the people around us. It applies to the way we relate to the different fragmented parts of our own identity.
It really does.
We've explored the numb parts and the terrified parts of a traumatized mind. But what about the parts of a person's identity that are deeply destructive, furious, or filled with shame, like the behaviors that sabotage careers and destroy marriages?
Well, navigating those destructive behaviors brings us to internal family systems therapy, or IFS, developed by Richard Schwartz. Okay. IFS operates on the premise that the human mind is not a single monolithic entity. It is a multiplicity. Our identity is an internal family of different parts. Parts that are playful, parts that are hypervigilant, parts that are deeply insecure.
So we all have these parts.
Yes, but trauma severely fractures this internal community, forcing these parts into extreme, polarized roles to ensure survival.
Right. And the most vulnerable parts of a person's identity, the trusting, innocent, childlike parts, are the ones that absorb the raw agony of the abuse.
Exactly.
Because carrying that level of terror and betrayal is metabolically unsustainable for daily functioning, the mind locks those parts away in the subconscious. IFS refers to these banished parts as the exiles.
And if you lock a volatile exile in the basement of your subconscious, the system requires heavy security to ensure the exile's pain never breaches the surface.
Makes sense.
Other parts of your identity are forced to organize as managers or protectors.
Give me a concrete example of how a manager operates in daily life.
Well, a manager might manifest as a relentless perfectionist that forces you to work 80-hour weeks.
Ensuring you are so exhausted and externally validated that you never have a quiet moment to feel the exile's worthlessness.
Exactly. Or a manager might be a deeply cynical, raging part that preemptively pushes romantic partners away the moment intimacy develops.
Ensuring the vulnerable exile is never betrayed again.
Right.
And when a manager fails and the exile's pain starts bleeding through, the system deploys the firefighters. These are the parts of our identity that act impulsively to extinguish the emotional fire at any cost. This is the sudden binge eating, the substance abuse, or the self-harm.
And this raises an important question because the tragic irony of trauma recovery is that individuals usually deeply loathe these protector and firefighter parts.
They despise the fact that they sabotage their relationships or struggle with addiction.
Yeah, and traditional therapy often focuses on eradicating these bad behaviors.
But IFS suggests you cannot wage war inside your own mind and expect to find peace.
Healing requires recognizing that every single one of those parts, no matter how toxic or destructive they appear today, originally formed as a desperate, brilliant adaptation to protect you from the terror of annihilation.
Wow.
The manager pushing people away kept you safe when you were surrounded by abusers. They served a vital, life-saving function.
So the goal isn't to kill off the angry or addicted parts of your identity. It is to cultivate what IFS calls self-leadership.
Exactly. Beneath the fragmented managers and exiles, there is an undamaged core essence in every person, a self characterized by curiosity, compassion, and calm.
The self.
Yes. The objective is to help the hardened protectors realize that the external danger has passed, allowing them to trust the core self to take the wheel. The self doesn't fire the protectors. It acts as an orchestra conductor.
I love that.
It reparents the exiles and gives the managers new, healthier roles, bringing the entire internal community into harmony.
You stop seeing yourself as a fundamentally broken machine that needs parts replaced, and start viewing your identity as a fractured community that requires compassionate leadership to integrate.
Beautifully said.
So let's pull all these threads together. We began by looking at the brain's neurological hardware, seeing how overwhelming trauma hypertrophies the amygdala and knocks the rational watchtower offline.
Right?
We saw how this constant, unbearable state of internal alarm forces the organism to pull the plug, starving the self-awareness networks and severing the critical internal compass of interoception.
Yeah.
We unpack the physiological mechanisms, how cortisol inflames the body, and how a frayed vagus nerve leaves us stuck on the accelerator.
The physical toll is immense.
It is. And finally, we explored how bottom-up physical interventions, the rhythmic movement of yoga, the nonverbal attunement of tossing a beach ball and stepping into the role of a compassionate conductor for our own internal parts, can actually rebuild the nervous system.
The ultimate takeaway from all this research is that the body unequivocally keeps the score. The physical imprint of your history is written into your neural pathways and your viscera, but neuroplasticity ensures that we have the power to rewire the hardware.
Right.
True healing is never just about recounting a narrative of the past. It is about restoring the physical ownership of your body and mind. It is about myelinating the pathways that allow you to feel safe and fully engaged in the present moment, transforming you from a hostage of your history into an active participant in your current life.
That is such a profound shift in perspective. If our brains and bodies are so incredibly adaptive, if they're willing to sever our capacity to feel and fracture our very identities just to keep us breathing through the unimaginable, I really want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Okay.
Consider that the most frustrating self-destructive behavior you or someone you deeply love struggles with right now might have actually been a brilliant, desperate adaptation that once saved a life.
It's so true.
The explosive rage, the emotional numbing, the avoidance. What if they aren't signs of a broken character, but the very mechanisms that ensured your survival? If we look at our ugliest, most difficult behaviors as outdated survival strategies rather than moral failings, how does that completely transform the way we treat ourselves and each other?